That rich countries have their own interests, as Lenin would say, in the core, and poor countries have their own interests, as Lenin and Wallerstein would say, those living in the periphery. Now, one can make the argument, for instance, that the expansion of what was once the G8, which was really the club of white rich nations, expanding to now be the G20 is an important gesture towards creating more global participation. But we also know the G20 is far from coherent. In fact, what the G20 has demonstrated to us is that there are fundamentally contending interests within this club of leading nations. That China has a set of interests that are fundamentally different from that of the United States. That Russia has a set of interests fundamentally different from that of the United States. That Canada, aside from hosting the party, really has no say in the G20 at all. So what the G20 does, even though it is a gesture towards greater inclusive participation in terms of the leading lights of global governance, what it in fact does is that it reveals for us unequal realities, yet fundamentally equal expectations. One of the best examples of this, we've already hammered China for its poor environmental policies. But one has to take seriously when the Americans say to the Chinese, you should be obligated and you should oblige and you should adhere to global governance mechanisms on global climate change, the Chinese will say, and not without great sympathy from a lot of poor countries in the world, that that is fundamentally unfair. That while it is true China has now eclipsed the United States as the largest GHG emitter in the world on a per capita basis, the United States is still higher. That one considers that there are 1.33 billion people in China, its environmental record actually ain't so bad. And as the Chinese will argue quite compellingly to a lot of other poorer countries in the world, China is still a less developed country. So again, global governance is a system in which we experience equal expectations. We are all in this together. Yet fundamentally, the fact of the matter is that we experience unequal realities. China, when it comes to global climate change, continues to adhere to poor country interests. The United States, on the other hand, adheres to rich country interests. The Chinese refrain often is that you had 150 years to industrialize. We've been doing this for 25. Give us a break. And I can assure you that that argument is compelling to many around the world. So, clicker question then. Should industrializing countries such as Brazil, Russia, India, and China, the BRICS, be held to the same standards as industrialized countries with respect to GHG emissions?
Russia's one of the Western, still technically the second world country.
46% of you say yes, they should be held to the same standards. 52% of you say no. Incidentally, last year, 55% of your classmates said yes. 45% of you said no. So, relatively even split, but as you can see, hardly a consensus in terms of how we should treat late industrializers in their environmental records. Fourth challenge. So we got 1, collective action problem, 2, non-compliance, 3, the myth of equal participation. The fourth is what I call state-centrism. When I read that quote from Stephen Harper, it really did sound lovely. Right? I mean, it really did sound like, wow, we are, I mean, it could have been, it could have been, you know, like in Bretton Woods. It could have been the leaders around that time, Churchill, maybe Keynes, talking about this notion of enlightened sovereignty. That we live in a world in which collective interests, in many ways, should trump very narrowly defined, strict national self-interest. We like to believe in the rhetoric of enlightened sovereignty. We really do. But the fact of the matter is we continue to live, and I've tried to demonstrate already to you, we continue to live in a state-centric world. We have international organizations. We have this thing called intergovernmentalism. In both of these instances, global governance is still populated, and it's still manifested, and it's still practiced by states and their governments. It is still states that make up this thing called global governance. And as I've already suggested to you, that despite this idea, this aspirational notion of enlightened sovereignty, the fact of the matter is that we still live in an international system in which we have the inviolability of state sovereignty, which on the one hand we require. It's a double-edged sword. We require state sovereignty because we need governments to have capacity to contribute to international governance. But it's precisely that sovereignty that allows states to engage in things like collective action problems, non-compliance, the perpetuation of global inequality, and the fact that we have a global governance system in which we cannot, and frankly should not, punish. In other words, that enlightened sovereignty is a rhetorical device. It may be aspirational. You as individuals may embody it. But the fact of the matter is that the international records suggest that in many ways this idea of enlightened sovereignty, be it from the mouth of Stephen Harper, be it from the mouth of Barack Obama, that this is still rhetoric. State-centrism, therefore, continues to be a constraint on global governance. We think about that then. It's highly unlikely, or one could make the argument that it's increasingly unlikely that we will have global solutions for local problems. But one new strand of thinking about it is to suggest maybe we might have local solutions for global problems. One area of research conducted by one of my colleagues in our department, Matthew Hoffman, actually looks at this, and one of the things he looks at is this local organization, or this transnational organization made up of local organizations, called the CCP, not that CCP in China, but the Cities for Climate Protection. And the Cities for Climate Protection was formed in 1993, and it's basically a consortium of locally based NGOs. And these locally based NGOs they basically trade information. They keep each other informed of new technologies. And these locally based NGOs are also engaged in local monitoring. As of 2006, 700 cities were part of this consortium. There are no national governments involved. There are no international organizations involved. This is merely an amalgam of 700 cities in Africa, Asia, Latin America, Europe, and North America, basically the world. Interestingly, these 700 cities account for 10% of global greenhouse GHGs, greenhouse gas emissions globally. No international organization, no national governments, an amalgam of locally based NGOs that together account for 10% of greenhouse gas emissions. So maybe in terms of global governance, we're looking at the global we should be. Maybe in terms of global governance, we should be looking at the local. Why, for instance, does the CCP here, Cities for Climate Change, focus on cities? It focuses on cities, for one, because cities are urban areas, and therefore we see the concentration of waste. It makes sense. You can have the highest impact by focusing on highly concentrated areas of waste, and therefore potential greenhouse gas emissions. You also look at cities because, frankly, federal governments are offloading these responsibilities. National governments are increasingly saying, look, this is not our responsibility. This is too expensive. It's too hard to coordinate. We're managing a whole country. So maybe the cities, you should do this. Either city governments or city NGOs. And lastly, the focus on cities because, frankly, they're closer to the ground. When you have these very locally based organizations, be it non-governmental or be it city government, you have much better feedback from the community. It's more likely that you can have popular forms of deliberation. It's more likely that you can form innovative partnerships between the public and private sector. In other words, what I'm suggesting here is maybe what we should be thinking about is rescaling global governance. That global governance, by virtue of our theories of international relations, has tended to focus on the global, has tended to focus on the international. That when you walk out of this class and you say, I want a career in global governance, you figure you have to go to New York, or you have to go to Geneva, or you have to go to London. But in fact, maybe, and this is the way in which I want to end today's conversation, maybe global governance actually is happening at the local level. That if you want a career or to have an impact in global governance, one way is to rescale global governance